Did you know that 30 years before the world knew about the AK-47 and 20 years before the United States created its legendary Garand rifle, Mexico already had the weapon of the future in its hands? While the armies of Europe, those self-proclaimed civilized powers, were still loading their rifles bullet by bullet, as in Napoleon's time, a Mexican engineer had already cracked the code of modern warfare. Imagine this scene, 1915, the sky over France. A German pilot is cornered by two British fighters. He has no heavy machine gun. According to all the laws of war, he should be dead. But suddenly, he pulls out a strange rifle with a huge disc magazine resembling a snail. He pulls the trigger and bang, bang, 30 shots in a matter of seconds. No reloading, no moving the bolt. The British fall engulfed in flames without understanding what the hell just shot them down. That German pilot did not survive thanks to Berlin's engineering. He survived thanks to a design created in Mexico City. The metal of his weapon did not bear the Mauser stamp, but rather the name Mondragón. This is the story of how Mexico invented the world's first automatic rifle, how we technologically humiliated the European powers, and of the brutal tragedy when revolution and cheap politics forced us to throw that future away. If you thought Mexico was a country that had always bought foreign technology, get ready. You are about to discover that it was we who taught the world how to shoot. To understand the magnitude of this madness, we need to erase from our memory the image of revolutionary Mexico with straw hats and old carbines. We have to go back to Mexico in 1890, the time of the Porfiriato. Back then, the world of weapons was stuck in the past. The standard was the bolt-action rifle. 2 or 3 movements for a single shot. It was slow, it was clumsy. But in the halls of the Chapultepec Military Academy, an artillery officer named Manuel Mondragón looked at those rifles with contempt. Mondragón was no ordinary soldier. He was a mathematical genius trapped in a uniform. While the rest of the world resigned itself to the way things were, he asked himself a forbidden question. Why do we force soldiers to expend energy reloading when the explosion of gunpowder has infinite energy? Mondragón sat down at his drawing board and sketched what seemed like science fiction at the time. He designed a tiny hole in the barrel. When the bullet passed through, the gunpowder gases entered through there, pushed a piston, and the piston did the dirty work, ejecting the shell and inserting a new bullet. Today this sounds trivial. This is how the AK-47 works. This is how the M16 works. But Mondragón patented this in 1887. Let me repeat that so it hurts. The year was 1887. The Wright brothers had not yet flown. Henry Ford had not invented the assembly line, and Mexico already had the patent for the modern assault rifle. We were literally 50 years ahead of our time. But this is where the logistical nightmare begins. Mexico had the brains, but it didn't have the hands. Mondragón had the perfect design, but he looked around him. And what did he see? An agrarian country. Our workshops could cast bronze barrels and repair them like Taurus, but the Mondragón rifle was pure clockwork. It needed high-tempered steel, capable of withstanding 3,000 atmospheres of pressure. It needed micron tolerances. If the piston was 1 mil wider, the weapon would explode in the soldier's face. Mondragón had to make the most painful decision for a nationalist: export his idea so that it could become a reality. He traveled to Switzerland, to the legendary SIG factory in Neussen. When the Swiss engineers saw the Mexicans' plans, they were speechless. "General," they told him, "this is too complex. No one uses a rotating bolt. It's impossible." But Mondragón would not take no for an answer. He personally supervised production, and in 1908 the beast was born. The Porfirio Diaz rifle, Mondragón system, model 1908. It was a work of art, elegant and lethal. It had a 10-round magazine, twice that of any German Mauser. It could fire as fast as you could pull the trigger. The government of Porfirio Diaz, obsessed with modernity, ordered 4,000 units. The plan was simple. The Mexican army would be the first in the history of the planet to be completely armed with automatic rifles. Imagine that for a second. A feared Mexico, a Mexico that doesn't need to borrow from anyone, a Mexico that sets the global military standard. We were at the top. We had the technology. We had oil money starting to flow. We had the ambition. But fate has a very dark sense of humor. Just as the boxes of Mondragón rifles were in the port of Hamburg, ready to cross the Atlantic and arm our soldiers, revolution broke out in Mexico. On November 20th, 1910, the country went up in flames, and in that fire we burned our ticket to the First World. Before I tell you how we lost everything, you have to understand why this rifle was so special. It wasn't just another weapon, it was a mechanical prophecy. The secret of Mondragón's genius lay in a part called the rotating bolt. Until then, inventors had tried to make automatic weapons by moving the entire barrel backward. It was heavy and clumsy. Mondragón left the barrel fixed. Instead, he invented a system where gases push a rod, and that rod forces the bolt to rotate on its own axis to unlock. It's a mechanical ballet. Rotate, open, eject, close, rotate. If you open a US Marine Corps M4 today, you'll see that system. If you open a German G36, you'll see that system. General Mondragón wrote the source code for all infantry weapons of the 20th and 21st centuries. But, and here's a giant but, Mondragón made a mistake, not an engineering mistake, but a judgment error. He created a weapon for an ideal army, not for the reality of Mexico. The 1908 Mondragón model had an adjustable gas valve. Do you know what it was for? To turn off the automatic system. The generals of the Porfiriato were afraid. They said, if we give an automatic rifle to a conscripted soldier, he'll get scared and use up all his bullets in a minute. So, the instruction was, use it as a manual rifle and only in extreme emergencies. Open the valve and unleash hell. And then the revolution came. The Diaz regime collapsed. Madero rose to power, then Huerta assassinated him. The country fell apart, and in Switzerland, the Seago factory was left with 4,000 rifles in storage because the Mexican government stopped paying the bills. No one in the chaos of the revolution wanted to take on Diaz's debt. So, why didn't Pancho Villa or Zapata steal those rifles? Why didn't they use them? Because the Mondragón was a Ferrari and the revolution was fought on tractors. The Swiss-Mexican rifle was a prima donna. It needed perfect, clean, imported ammunition. It needed fine oil. It needed specialized mechanics. What did the revolutionaries have? Poor quality gunpowder, cartridges reloaded 3 times, dust, mud, and rain. As soon as a grain of sand from the Chihuahua Desert entered the Mondragón's clockwork mechanism, the weapon jammed. It was the ultimate irony. We had the most advanced weapon in the universe, but we were too poor and disorganized to use it. The Villistas preferred the old Winchester 3030, the 3030 carbine, which the rebels carried, according to the song. Why? Because the Winchester worked, even if you used it as a hammer. Mexico rejected its own invention because it was too good for our dirty war. And this is where the opportunistic villain of the story, the German Empire, comes in. It is 1914. World War I begins. Germany desperately needs weapons. Its spies learn that there is a beach of orphaned rifles in Switzerland, Mexican rifles that no one wants. Germany buys the entire batch. They take them to the Western Front. First, they give them to the infantry. Total failure. The mud in the trenches jams the mechanism just like the dust in Mexico. But the Germans are pragmatic. They understand something key. There is no mud in the air. The German Imperial Air Force Luftstreitkraft adopts the rifle. They design a special 30-round magazine for it, the famous Trommel magazine. They rename it Trigger Selfs L Karabiner, Model 1915. But if you scratch the German paint, underneath it still said Mondragón system. For 2 years, Allied pilots lived in terror of Germany's secret weapon, a rifle that fired like a machine gun. Imagine the scene. A French engineer analyzing a downed German plane, finding the weapon, wiping away the blood and reading the patent, discovering that the weapon that was killing his compatriots did not come from the CRUP factories in Essen, but from the mind of a Mexican who had been exiled by his own country. Because that is the other part of the tragedy. Manuel Mondragón did not die a hero. During the tragic decade of 1913, Mondragón chose the wrong side. He joined the coup against Madero. It was he who ordered the cannons to be fired at the National Palace. In the official history of the revolution, written by the victors, Mondragón became the traitor, the Huertista. And in Mexico, we have a bad habit. If we dislike someone, we erase their achievements. The revolutionary government decided that we could not be proud of an invention made by a traitor, so they erased him from the textbooks, buried the patent, and destroyed the prototypes. We preferred to be technologically irrelevant rather than admit that the villain of the story was a genius. Manuel Mondragón died in exile in San Sebastián, Spain, in 1922. He died alone, despised, looking at the sea that separated him from the homeland he tried to modernize. The rifles that remained in Germany were destroyed after the war by the Treaty of Versailles. The few that remained in Mexico rusted in warehouses or were sold as scrap metal. It seemed like the end. It seemed like the world had forgotten, but ideas are bulletproof. Mondragón's body was cold, but his U.S. patent 853,715 was very much alive on the design tables of the superpowers. Let's travel to 1930, Springfield Armory, United States. A brilliant engineer named John Garand is desperate. The U.S. Army wants a semi-automatic rifle. Garand has tried everything, and nothing works well. So he reviews the archives, finds the Mexicans' work, studies the gas system, studies the rotating bolt, takes that idea, simplifies it for mass production, and creates the M1 Garand, the rifle that won World War II. The rifle that General Pétain called the best battle implement ever designed. That rifle has Mexican DNA. Without Mondragón, D-Day would have been very different. Now let's travel to the Soviet Union, 1946. A wounded tank sergeant, Mikhail Kalashnikov, wants to create a weapon to defend Mother Russia. Kalashnikov was not an academic. He was a born and intuitive mechanic. He examines the captured German rifles, examines the Garand, and at the heart of the AK-47, the most famous weapon in history, what do we find? A long gas piston, a two-lug rotating bolt. It is the same architecture that Mondragón drew in Chapultepec. Kalashnikov did what we did not know how to do. He made the system foolproof. He increased the clearances so that dirt would not get in the way, but the principle is Mexican. Do you understand the magnitude of the tragedy? Mexico gave the world the source code for the modern weapon, and we returned to the past. After the revolution, our government standardized the Mauser rifle, a simple, reliable, but hopelessly obsolete bolt-action rifle. While the world was racing toward automation, Mexico voluntarily took a step back toward the 19th century. Why? This is where our old enemy, malinchismo, and lack of strategic vision comes into play. The government's logic was murderous. Why do we want our own factories? Why do we want our own engineers? It's difficult, it's expensive, we have oil, we sell oil, and we buy weapons made by the Belgians or the gringos. That decision, made quietly in the offices of the 1920s, defined our destiny for a century. We gave up being creators and accepted being eternal buyers. Now let's do the most painful exercise for a Mexican. Let's play Elubiera. Imagine an alternative Mexico. Imagine that after the revolution, the new government, instead of taking revenge on Mondragón, acts pragmatically, as the United States did with Nazi scientist Wernher von Braun to reach the moon. They say to him, "General, you are an enemy of democracy, but you are a genius. Here is a factory in Monterrey. Here is a budget. Make us a weapon that is not afraid of mud." With resources, Mondragón simplifies the design, and by 1935, Mexico has its own reliable automatic rifle, the Mondragón Model 1935 rifle. When World War II breaks out, Mexico is not just a supplier of raw materials and labor. We became the arsenal of democracy. Squadron 2011, the Aztec Eagles, flew to the Philippines not with weapons loaned by the United States, but with their own assault rifles, better than those of the Allies. Made in Mexico became a seal of quality on par with made in Germany. We became an industrial superpower. This is not science fiction. We had everything we needed for that takeoff. Patents, prototypes, genius. We were only missing one thing: belief in ourselves. Today, the original 1908 Mondragón rifle is the holy grail of collectors. There are almost none left. At auctions in the United States, they pay $50,000 for one. Museums fight to have one, but in Mexican history books, Mondragón's name does not even appear as the inventor. We teach children the names of the politicians who destroyed the country, but we forget the engineers who tried to build it. 100 years have passed, a century of silence and buying foreign junk. But history is cyclical. At the beginning of the 21st century, something began to change. In 2005, at a military parade, the Mexican Special Forces came out with a new, futuristic, angular, aggressive weapon. It was the FX-05 Ciucoal, Fire Snake, in Nahual. Skeptics at home and abroad immediately shouted, "It's a copy! They stole the design from the German G-36. The Heckler Hancock Company even sent lawyers to Mexico City, threatening to sue. They were sure that Mexicans were incapable of creating anything of their own. They came to destroy us. But when they took the FX-05 apart and looked inside, they had to retract their statements. The mechanism was different, it was original, it was adapted to our machinery and our soldiers. Yes, the FX-05 is a good rifle, reliable, modern. We can be proud, but let's be honest in the mirror of history. It is not a radical advance. It is not a revolution. By creating the Ciucoal, we simply achieved what the world has been doing for 50 years. We made a quality analog, but it is not at the level of the Mondragón 1908 when we were 50 years ahead of everyone else. The Ciucoal is the symbol of the recovery of a patient who was in a coma for 100 years, but it is not yet an Olympic medal. The story of General Mondragón is not just an anecdote about an old rifle. It is a brutal lesson that it is time for us to learn. Lesson 1. Innovation is dead without infrastructure. Mondragón did not lose because he was stupid, but because he did not have factories. Today we have factories. We build extremely complex things for Tesla, for Boeing, for Audi. The infrastructure is ready. Lesson 2. You can't mix talent and politics. Technology is neutral. We have no right to cancel inventions just because we don't like the author's political stance. Lesson 3, and most important, the courage to be the first. Why do we always wait? Do we wait for Elon Musk to build the rocket before we start dreaming about space? Do we wait for the Germans to make the rifle before we make a similar one? Right now, as you watch this video, in some garage in Puebla, in a laboratory at the Polytechnic or at the Tec de Monterrey, there is a new Mondragón sitting there. Maybe he is inventing a new type of battery that will replace lithium. Maybe a cure for cancer. Maybe an artificial intelligence algorithm. And that boy or girl is facing the same choice as the general in 1887. Bang their head against the wall of bureaucracy and indifference here, or buy a one-way ticket to Silicon Valley, Berlin, or Tokyo. If we let them leave again, we are idiots. We deserve to be a country of eternal maquiladoras and cheap labor. The Mondragón rifle is silent today. Its mechanisms are rusting away in museums or in the private collections of rich gringos. But its history screams louder than a gunshot. It reminds us that Mexican ingenuity is not just the ability to fix a car with wire and gum, it is the ability to create world-class engineering masterpieces. Look at your hands. We still have the same hands that assembled that mechanism some in 1908. The potential hasn't gone anywhere. It's just dormant. If this story made you angry about missed opportunities, excellent. Anger is fuel. Use it to demand more from yourself and your country. If you felt pride, even better. It means you know who we really are. Now a question for you. Did you know that the Germans fought with Mexican weapons in World War I? And what do you think? If it hadn't been for the revolution, would Mexico have become a technological superpower, or would corruption have ruined it anyway? Write your opinion in the comments. I read everything because it is in these debates that we find the truth that was hidden from us for 100 years. And don't forget to subscribe. We have stories ahead of us about Mexican cars that humiliated Porsche, about ships we built, and about the future we can still recover. Mexico was great and can be great again, but only if we stop forgetting our heroes.